Thank you all for joining me today. My name is David Sommer, and I am the Director of Strategic Operations for Net-Translators. I've been in localization for much of the past decade and previously worked for an international standards body. Over the past decade, before my current position, I'd been a localization project manager, having worked on projects of every size and shape imaginable. I want to share with you over the next hour my experience in helping to create a translation quality measurement methodology that is both efficient and cost-effective. If any of you have any questions during the course of this webinar, please send them to webinar@nettranslators.com as it appears on this page, and we will try to answer at least some of them at the conclusion of this presentation. Again, that is webinar, WEBINAR, at net-translators.com. My colleague is monitoring this email and will pass the questions on to me at the end. I am hopeful that the items on our agenda today will give you some idea of what to expect from this session, and at the end I will present a quality report based upon our methodology. We are going to make available to 3 attendees a free quality assessment of their TMs, as will be presented a bit later. Certainly the items I would like to emphasize during this webinar go to the fuzzy manner in which we all define quality. Peter Drucker, who passed away in 2005, was an American management consultant and leader in the development of management education, having invented a concept known as management by objectives. Bill Cohen, who was Peter Drucker's first executive PhD graduate, relates a story about how he worked for a company that made oxygen breathing masks for military agents. He relates how no competitor ever succeeded in getting into this market due to a single valve used in an oxygen mask. No matter how much quality the potential manufacturer built into the valve, a significant number of valves produced failed to perform as specified during quality testing of production batches. What was their secret? Well, all the potential competitors would randomly test the valves and get expectedly a certain amount of fails. The company that Bill Cohen worked for tested each valve during the production process and simply threw away the defective valves. This is what met the government guidelines. In other words, the company that won the bid was not necessarily the company that made the best product, but rather the company that understood best what the quality benchmarks were and how to control the process that went into meeting these benchmarks. In the same way, we must look at translation quality not as an absolute, but rather in such a way as to determine if the output meets our needs and adapt ourselves accordingly. So in essence, we have multiple goals as regards quality. Naturally, we would like to maintain consistent quality of the translations, and perhaps more importantly, be certain that the translations give us the confidence that they will meet our needs. So to take this from the theoretical to the practical, we would have to ask ourselves, why the heck is this so hard? Well, firstly, as opposed to other products where we can get an indication of quality by, say, kicking the tires of a car, translations are really a black box for you unless you know that language. And if a company is translating into 30 or 40 languages, then the chances of someone being able to know that many languages are remote. This, of course, does not take into account in ICR programs, which can benefit from just this type of methodology that we will describe here. Further complicating this is that the QC department cannot control what they cannot see. It's not like a discoloration. It would be more like someone who is colorblind doing quality control for traffic lights. Finally, of course, there is the fact that there are simply too many things to monitor during the translation process, each of which can affect the overall as well as absolute quality of the translation. While it may be common knowledge that there are several different methods of evaluating translation quality, most companies that I had worked with when I was just starting out in this industry used a fairly simple way of evaluating performance. The most memorable, and I will not mention the company's name, was to evaluate the translation on a scale of 1 to 5. Since the customer worked with several vendors and cross-checked them using one vendor for translation and the other for review, it seemed not only inaccurate and error-prone, but more importantly, prone to intentional inaccuracies on the part of a reviewer who may feel that by giving a poor review, they would be given the job of translating rather than review. And let's face it, translators would rather spend their time translating than reviewing. In the realm of academia, there were a few options, such as the SAE J2450, developed specifically for the automotive industry, or the LISA QA model, which was created by the now defunct LISA, and to a great extent uses the J2450. However, the aforementioned standards do nothing to meet the business needs of translation providers or their customers who need to get it out better and faster, as well as to monetize the service. Here is an example of an evaluation form that is well thought out and can give you a great deal of information to a consumer as well as provider of translation services. The only problem here, of course, is that it is not accurate, repeatable, or quantifiable in a meaningful manner. This is typical of the way in which we judge translations, and certainly typical of the way in which customers will measure the linguistic quality. So we needed a solution that would be quick, accurate, and repeatable. What I hope to do during this presentation is to give you some hints for creating a method similar to what we have created. So to get started, the first thing we need to realize is that even if you have the best quality translation in the world, if it does not meet your business needs, then it is not worth much. For example, looking at this graphic, you will notice that the language is Spanish. Now, I do not know what the quality of the translation is, but it is for the most part irrelevant. If you notice, the yellow highlighting indicates that if you are in Jamaica, then you should contact the office shown. The only problem is that while there may be place names like Ocho Rios in Spanish Town, Jamaica is an English-speaking country due to long British colonial rule. Having lived there myself for 3 years, I can personally attest to this. So here you have an example of what may be a good translation, but completely bad quality. This just emphasizes the case that there must be developed alongside a method of measuring an understanding of what is important to measure. In other words, not every good translation will be useful, and not every so-called bad translation should be cause to fire your translator. Each translation job must be considered in the context of the intended use. In the case of the warning shown here, the intended use is to provide potentially life-saving information about the dangerous weather conditions. My colleague, a native Spanish speaker, tells me that he thinks that this is a bad automatic translation, yet nonetheless, it meets the needs of the consumer by providing critical information in a most timely manner. Could it be better linguistically? Possibly, but at what cost? If the cost is to delay the information, then the translation, irrespective of its quality, has not met the customer's needs. Translation for many is a closed book. As I mentioned earlier, you really don't understand what to look for unless you speak the language or have someone who does. Even then, you really cannot judge if it is good quality, as there are many other factors to be considered. The source file, for example, may be problematic. The deadlines may be rushed. Not enough information or reference was given. The translator may not have been trained on the product. Costs can also factor into the equation. For example, in judging costs, most people will say something along the lines of, "Give me a quote for 100 words for these languages." This ignores the real costs of managing a language. For instance, does this take into account the terminology creation and maintenance? Does this take into account the layout of doc or the presentation at web? Have you considered who will create the images and graphics? Is there an in-context review? All these things add costs, which are to be considered when speaking about quality, of course. Also, the type of translation setup you have can also impact the quality of the translations. While you may have an in-house people who know the product, the service, the terminology, you need to ask yourself if they are sufficiently enrolled to provide you with a commitment. Why is it important to communicate quality benchmarks to the client? Because these all have to do with the factors affecting quality expectations. Quality is not an absolute. It really depends a great deal on perceptions and one's understanding of the perceptions of others. For instance, the client's and the provider's perceptions of each other, the provider's perception of the client's perception, the difference between the quality specs and the delivery, and the difference between the delivery and what is communicated about the delivery to the customer. And of course, the customer's expectations versus their perceptions. Quality is always defined as meeting the needs and expectations of the client or user. There's no single set of what exactly quality means. Taking a simple example from a Microsoft Word document, you will see that there are essentially 4 items that affect quality, and I think that the perception of quality is as important. You can give the best quality in the world, but if the customer does not perceive it as a quality deliverable, then you're sunk. So first off, we can all assume correctly that linguistic quality is paramount, and you would be, in my humble opinion, 100% correct. So I will deal with that in a moment. First, I want to deal with what I perceive to be other factors. So there would be 3 scenarios. Firstly, there could be a rush job of 10,000 words, and it could be a great translation and a day late. That would be not obviously a quality deliverable. It could be a small translation, perfect linguistically on time, but if the measurements aren't localized correctly or left the same in the source, then again, it's not exactly a quality deliverable. And it could also be an 80-page user manual which goes through the entire process correctly, checking for localization issues, making sure that other issues are taken care of, such as the glossary creation, the terminology creation, and so on and so forth. So, how would you go about resolving these issues? Well, you could start at the source naturally, get your processes in place, set up a quality program. If you have done all this, then the next step would, of course, be to monitor it. And one effective way to monitor it is to measure the translation quality by defining what quality you expect, measuring it, and then improving. We all know about the 3 project constraints and their impact on quality, but I contend that you should also be able to determine quality as immovable and still meet your project goals. But that's for a different webinar, of course. We all understand that there are different approaches to measuring quality, and what I'm presenting is, in my opinion, a practical approach that we developed to meet ours and our clients' needs. Of course, there is no magic pill that will solve all your problems, but if you are consistent in your approach, you should be able to create a repeatable, objective, and accurate methodology. So we must now examine the items which affect our perceptions of quality. This is important because it's not good enough to give an arbitrary grade based upon our gut feeling as to the quality of the translation. Oftentimes, the person evaluating the translation is not looking at the source, but only at the output and basing the assessment on an argumentative rather than qualitative approach. If the source is horrible, it may be that this affected the translation, and ignoring this is simply incorrect. So to look at what I call 3 items which define one's perception of quality, I identify them as follows. Preferences, these would be stylistic issues, for instance, mandatory changes, and these are obviously spelling mistakes and misinterpretation of its source text, inconsistencies, incorrect references to the UI items, and so on. And finally, what I refer to as reviewer-generated incorrections. This means that the person to whom the review was sent introduced corrections or changes which simply do not appear in the source. Just to digress for a moment, it is critical that before you start to measure the quality that you have done everything to create a good quality baseline. This would have to include, of course, actions such as creating terminology databases and undertaking source review, ensuring processes that include editing and review in addition to translation, and then defining what it is that you want to measure. In other words, you should define the quality points which are important to you. So now we are about to begin. The first step is to actually define what an error is. For example, if you want to say millions of people in order to emphasize a large amount, but the target language uses the equivalent of scores of people to mean the same thing, this may not be an error, but if it is a true measurement of, say, a medication, and the difference is measured in milliliters, then this would be an error. Next, you must determine the severity of the error by judging its impact on you and your business. And this impact may be safety, reputation, or simply the user ability to understand how to use your product, and then, of course, assigning a value to it. Most commonly, the value would be tied into high, medium, and low. Once you have done that, you need to record the errors by type and severity. In addition, you will need to accurately describe the issue. The best way to do this is to create an assessment form, which we have done. This assessment form should be based upon a single methodology and include all the issues that are important to you. What we record is the type of error broken down into 5 categories, and then we assign 3 levels of severity. I will go a little more into this later in the webinar, but it is important to point out that you may need to add additional factors when doing this. So now that we have defined the parameters more or less, it is time to create an assessment form. This may be achieved by very complex development or more practically by using readily available and adaptable tools. Our basic form as shown here is created using Excel. You will see in the highlighted area that we require firstly a certain amount of information about the project. Note that it is crucial to get the exact source word count in order that the tool work correctly. The next part of the form includes brief instructions to the reviewers. This should not, however, take the place of instructions as to how to carry out the review. Note that on the left is a severity column indicating high, medium, and low. We will talk a little bit more about this later. This highlighted area is simply the total number of issues according to the severity and simply helps us track the totals. This is the area where the reviewer is required to record each issue along with the explanation. One of the advantages, by the way, of this method is that it is tool independent. This is important since we at least use several different types of tools. Keep in mind that often the assessment is as important as the corrected deliverable. This helps us, for example, identify issues early on in the review. If, for example, we have 200,000 words to review, we are able to identify rather quickly the general quality of the translation and send it back to the translator if need be, before we complete the review. This means that we are better able to meet deadlines. My experience has shown that other methods require a full review before you have an indication as to overall quality. Finally, since we do recognize that there are occasional subjective factors, we also require the reviewer to render a subjective opinion as seen in the highlighted area. Often this can help mitigate a poor showing by helping us identify areas which need improvement. For example, if the translation is a fail because of terminology, yet the reviewer indicates that subjectively the translation is good, then we can deduce that there is perhaps a need to enrich the term base. The highlighted area called Copy Data takes the information and copies it into our performance tracking system. Looking at the Lisa QA tool, you will notice many of the same features which we have incorporated. So let's look at how all this works. We see here an actual assessment from a project into Russian. You will notice in the circled area that there are 3 items noted: percentage, weighted grade, review factor. Percentage is simply the number of errors as a percentage of the total. The weighted grade is a grade which takes into account the severity of the issue, and using the method we will discuss shortly, gives a grade to the translation. The review factor takes into account the time allocated to the review. I hope that we will have some time to discuss this at the end. If not, feel free to contact me offline to discuss this. You will notice here that there are 5 issues which are identified as high. If we identify them as medium, the translation becomes a pass rather than a fail. This is due to the way in which we assign the values to the severity. So how do we go about determining pass-fail criteria? Well, this would be industry and customer dependent, and the criteria would be determined by taking into account those issues which are most important to the customer. Obviously, the criteria for a blog could be different than the criteria for a medical device or banking system. Let's not even talk about marketing at this stage. Maybe we'll have another webinar about creating quality marketing translations. Simply put, how does our system work? Well, as described earlier, you have the fixed grade and the weighted grade, which essentially is the total. We then assign a value of 1 for low, 10 for medium, and 100 for a high. And of course, the calculation is as you see it here. A plus B plus C over the word count equals the weighted grade. Here we see how we can calculate the score. So if you have 10,000 words and 22 low errors, 4 medium errors, and 1 high error, the total score would be 162, or 1.62% total weighted grade, or a grade of 98.38%. And the review factor, of course, is a multiplier based upon time spent in review. So at this point, it's important to note that this could be a pass or this could be a fail. We have to set the threshold together at the start of the project. So now that we have explained the method, let's look at how we implement this system. So the first thing is for the reviewers to be identified. You have to identify the qualified stakeholders. And those could be ICR people, those could be trained reviewers. Once you've identified them, you have to train them in this methodology. They really must know how to determine the severities and the categories. And of course, you must always give them the same information that you gave to the translator. Once you've got that in place, you can track the quality over time because you're using a system that's repeatable. And of course, if you're tracking the quality, you can identify areas where you can improve upon the quality as well. So it's always crucial to give clear, concise instructions to the reviewer. This is an example of what we give, the instructions that we give to our reviewers. So as I discussed earlier, that we use this also to track performance. We hit that copy data button, and that throws it into our database. And we can take out statistics, which can help us to judge performance over time. As you can see in this graphic, the quality has been more or less consistent over time, except for one anomaly. This is why we need to track performance over time and not as a singular event. This anomaly would need to be investigated and corrective action taken in order for us to prevent issues such as this. So what about the role of automated tools in the process? We have found that automated tools enable us to check factors that are not specifically human-based, such as spelling, consistency, terminology, spacing, numbers, and so on. These tools are especially effective in quickly identifying potential problematic areas. We have created comprehensive and extremely accurate quality reports based upon the combined use of automated and human assessments. And just to give you an example, we'll take a look. We have created comprehensive and extremely accurate quality reports based upon the combined use of automated and human assessments. Please write me and let me know if you're interested in getting a sample about this. Perhaps the benefits of measuring quality should be expressed here. It gives us the ability to approach issues in a more proactive manner and lower costs overall. For instance, the prevention costs, which are part of the quality management system, are lowered by reducing the amount of calls to our help desk. Of course, there's appraisal costs and failure costs as well. So each of these things, when we are proactive, we can reduce the amount of costs overall that are hidden from the straightforward cost of localization. So what are the key steps? Well, we have to set our goals, establish metrics, measure, and improve quality. Once this is implemented, we review this, and then we can continue on in our cycle of quality. So what are our conclusions? Well, it's difficult but not impossible to quantify quality. You must choose a uniform quality measurement method. You must always implement a disciplined approach to measuring quality. And it's very important to get buy-in from all the parties who are involved in the process. There are certainly commercial benefits and personal benefits to improving and measuring and improving quality. At this point, we're going to offer a free quality assessment, as I mentioned earlier on, of your TMs. These will be raffled off among the participants, and you will be notified later on if you've won or not. Here at Net-Translators, localization is our business. We concentrate on providing services only in those areas in which we excel. With locations in the US, Argentina, UK, and Israel, we're able to handle our global customers' needs in more than 60 languages. Net-Translators and our staff, including our in-country translators and reviewers, provide the full range of services in order to make your product truly global. Net-Translators, our project management teams are closely monitored. This centralized control enables us to ensure that all processes are being adhered to. Furthermore, Net-Translators utilizes a best-of-breed approach to its tool set, thus ensuring that our customers have the confidence that their projects are managed not only by the best team possible, but with the optimal tool for each project. Our one-of-a-kind multilingual QA center is staffed by native-speaking QA experts who have technology backgrounds and with this understanding provide expert testing services across all languages. In addition, the fact that our testing is done under one roof enables shared resources and leverages the knowledge across languages. Finally, our company-wide passion is evident in our people. Those of you who have been in this business for a while know that without this passion, you will not last long in this industry. Our people are passionate about what they do, passionate about whom they do it for. We not only adhere to recognized international standards, but we are also certified to the standards that mean the most to us, and those include not only ISO 9001, but also ISO 13485, which is an ISO standard that represents the requirements for a comprehensive quality management system for the design and manufacture of medical devices, as well as EN 15038, which is a quality standard developed especially for translation service providers. This standard, with its frequent audits, ensures the consistent quality of the service. And finally, the Canadian Standard for Translation Services, CAN-CGSB 131.10/2008, which establishes and defines the requirements for the provision of translation services by translation service providers. These certifications attest to our commitment for providing quality to our customers worldwide. Of course, it is not only the quality of the translation, but as I noted earlier on in this webinar, it is about the quality of the service, and Net-Translators has been recognized not only by our valued customers, but also by independent organizations such as Top 10 Reviews, which has for 2 consecutive years rated Net-Translators as #1 in translation services. Finally, to focus a bit on Top 10 Reviews for a moment, and why is this really significant? When they evaluated literally dozens of companies, they eventually whittled down their finalists to 9 contenders. Their focus was on companies that gave the best service, had an in-depth knowledge of website localization, and gave the best value. In the end, they chose Net-Translators as the #1 company. Remember, Top 10 Reviews' motto is, "We do the research so you don't have to." Thank you all once again for joining me today. I hope that this webinar has given you the basic tools on how to build your own evaluation system. If you would like to get in touch with me personally, I invite you to send me an email to the address that appears on the screen. At this point, I am opening the floor to any questions or comments. If you would like, you can send your questions via the GoToWebinar dashboard or via the email I gave out at the beginning of the webinar.